Listen up, friends, because what you're about to hear is no ordinary frontier tale. This is a story of two lost souls on the boundless Arizona plains, a desperate settler widow, and an injured Apache raider. Their paths should never have crossed, yet fate thrust them together under the harshest sun and fiercest storms the Wild West could conjure. When a single act of compassion sparks a complicated bond, betrayals brew and lines between enemies blur. Love and hate mingle like dust in the wind, and the most unlikely marriage stands between vengeance and salvation. Brace yourself, this is only the beginning. The Arizona sun glared mercilessly over the sprawling desert. Juniper shrubs and towering saguaros stood like sentinels, offering small pockets of shade amid a scorching expanse. Maria Colton wiped the sweat from her brow as she stood outside the small cabin that she once shared with her late husband Thomas. A widow for just 6 months, she was slowly coming to grips with the demands of frontier life alone. Situated near the San Pedro River, their homestead had always been remote, but after Thomas's passing, its isolation became suffocating. Each day offered a fresh challenge, lugging water from the well, chasing off coyotes in the night, patching holes in the barn roof. Yet Maria persevered, guided by memory and love. Thomas had always believed in her. Some days, when the wind howled across the plains, she swore she could still hear his reassuring voice calling her name. Born in a small town near Independence, Missouri, Maria had journeyed west in search of land and opportunity, lured by the promise of fertile soil and a fresh start. She had crossed paths with Thomas Colton in Santa Fe. A quiet man of slender build but steely determination, Thomas had stolen her heart with his gentle ways. Marriage soon followed, and together they carved out a life in one of the harshest territories in the Union. But fate proved cruel. When a fever swept through the region, it claimed Thomas, leaving Maria with only her grief. It was rumored that hostilities between settlers and Apache bands were at an all-time high. Maria had been told stories of raiders riding in the night, torches ablaze, seeking revenge for the constant encroachment on their ancestral lands. Indeed, the tension thrummed through the desert air. Yet until now, Maria's homestead had avoided any trouble. Some neighbors, like Mr. and Mrs. Bishop, a few miles away, attributed it to pure luck. Others credited the well-known Apache leaders who drew the frontier lines, such as Cochise, known to negotiate at times, or Geronimo, feared for his unpredictable raids. But luck could run out, and diplomacy could fail, leaving Maria vulnerable. Maria's only solace was the knowledge that the region's most infamous conflicts clustered around Fort Bowie, a day's ride to the east, and near the White Mountain Apache territory to the north. Her homestead existed in a less populated corridor, still dangerous, but quieter. She believed that, if she kept her head low, the storm would pass over her. And so she continued her routine, checking livestock at dawn, hoeing the small patch of corn, and writing in a battered journal under lantern light every evening. Her handwriting had grown shakier since Thomas died, but the act of recording her feelings gave her purpose. Every morning, she vowed to make a go of this land, if not for her own sake, then for her late husband, whose spirit seemed woven into every plank of the cabin. Yet she could not remain blind to the changes in the air. Rumors carried by riders from Tucson to Tombstone brought news of increased raids. They spoke of a new Apache warrior known only as Nateo, a man said to carry an unquenchable thirst for vengeance after losing kin to territorial battles. Whispers labeled him dangerous, cunning, and relentless. Maria tried to push these dark rumors away and focus on survival. But destiny was already shifting under the relentless sun with plans far beyond her imagining. A distant neighing shook Maria from her chores one scorching afternoon. She was checking the corral fence when the sound of a wounded horse drifted in from the foothills. The loneliness of the homestead amplified every stray echo, and this one set her nerves on edge. Curiosity warred with caution. Apache raids had been increasing. Any stranger might be a threat. Nevertheless, the call of an animal in distress tugged at her heart. She put down her tools and walked slowly, her rifle resting in the crook of her arm. The sun blazed overhead, shimmering heat waves off the dry ground. Rounding a rocky outcrop, she found the source of the commotion, a paint horse sides, heaving an arrow shaft embedded deep in its flank. The horse's reins lay tangled and collapsed against a boulder lay a man. His face was coppery with dust and blood, his hair long and dark, braided in Apache style. Startled, Maria froze, fear galloping through her veins. She had never seen an Apache so close, let alone one who was bleeding heavily. His eyes opened to slits, revealing a depth of pain and exhaustion. A silent standoff ensued, she a white settler woman, and he presumably the raider they called Natio or one of his band. Her heart hammered like a war drum. By all accounts, she should run. No one would fault her for avoiding an Apache warrior, especially one who might be a known threat. Yet something in his expression, desperation, vulnerability, sliced through her fear. She hesitated, shifting on her feet. The horse let out another tortured whinny. Blood trickled from the man's shoulder, staining his simple buckskin shirt. He was trembling, breathing in ragged gasps. Maria recognized the arrow lodged near his collarbone and the nasty gash across his ribs. Instinct, or perhaps compassion, overrode her terror. She might have lost her husband to illness, but she still remembered how to treat a wound. In the wilderness, you either help or watch someone die. Slowly she approached. The man's face twitched, and he tried to lift his hand in warning. He muttered a curse in a language she did not understand, but recognized as Apache. "You're wounded," she whispered, voice trembling. I can help." He stared at her, confusion flitting across his eyes. Then they rolled back, and he fainted. Any chance of him attacking her, if he had meant to, evaporated in the scorching sunlight. Maria had a choice to make, and she made it with a resigned sigh. Working quickly, she scanned the horizon for any sign of other raiders. Fear prickled on her skin. If there were more Apaches nearby, they might misunderstand her intentions. Or possibly the cavalry from Fort Bowie might show up at the worst moment. Danger lurked in every direction, but she couldn't leave this man to die. Wincing, Maria tugged on his good arm, dragging him bit by bit toward her homestead. Once or twice the man roused, moaning incoherently, but he was too weak to walk on his own. She urged his wounded horse along, though it hobbled with each step, blood matting its coat. The journey to her cabin felt endless. Every bump on the rocky terrain threatened to knock him loose from her grasp. At last they reached the small porch. With a final burst of effort, she hauled him through the door and onto the bed. Dust swirled around them, and sweat poured down Maria's neck. She took a moment to catch her breath, leaning against the bedpost. Her heart pounded with adrenaline and fear. Fear not just of this Apache warrior she had saved, but of what consequences might follow. In a land simmering with tension, no act is without repercussions. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maria lit a lantern and gathered her rudimentary medical supplies. This man, so close to death, now lay at her mercy. She could save him or not, and in saving him, she might unleash havoc upon herself. But her conscience gave her no alternative. She began her work, hands trembling beads of sweat on her brow. Outside, the desert wind picked up howling through the canyons like a warning cry. Maria boiled water on the stove, using every precious drop. Fresh water was life here never wasted, but she couldn't in good conscience let him go without proper treatment. She retrieved the whiskey Thomas had left behind. It burned her throat just to breathe in its pungent aroma, but she knew it would serve as a disinfectant. The man's eyes flickered open when she swabbed the arrow wound on his shoulder. He jerked teeth, gritted against the pain. Her heart almost stopped, but she pressed on, muttering a quiet apology. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I have to do this." He glared at her, struggling to focus. As she cut away his buckskin shirt to tend the gash, she noticed scars across his abdomen, marks of a life led on the edge, possibly from conflicts with other tribes or the cavalry. She tried not to dwell on what violence this man might have committed or endured. Instead, she strove to keep him alive, just as she'd done for Thomas during his fever, though that battle she ultimately lost. When she was done cleaning the wound and removing the arrow shaft, she covered it with a clean bandage, layering cloth strips to keep infection at bay. The tension in the room was palpable. He stared at her with suspicion, clearly wary of any kindness offered by a white settler. But he was too weak to resist. Exhaustion soon pulled him back into unconsciousness. Maria stayed by his side through the night, nodding off in a chair rifle within arm's reach. She could not fully trust him, even if she pitied him. Sometime past midnight, he awoke, and a raspy voice emerged. "Water," he croaked. She handed him a tin cup, guiding it to his lips. He drank greedily, eyes never leaving her face. Silence wrapped around them, heavier than the desert darkness outside. By morning, the worst of the fever had set in. Beads of sweat coated his face as his body fought infection. Maria bathed his forehead with a damp cloth, remembering Thomas's final days. She wondered if she was destined to cradle another life that might slip away. She refused to let that happen. Not again. As the hours stretched into days, he stabilized, drifting in and out of consciousness. When he could finally speak coherent words, he revealed his name, Naichi. Realizing her limited understanding, he repeated it carefully. Maria recognized enough of the local stories. Naichi was the name of a prominent Chiricahua Apache leader's son, but she couldn't be sure if this was the same man or if he carried a similar name. She didn't press him for details. In these days of recuperation, Maria's isolation deepened. She had to keep Naichi hidden. If any passing cavalry patrol discovered him, they would assume she was collaborating with the enemy. Conversely, if Apaches found him in a settler's cabin, the situation could also erupt into violence. She found herself in a precarious middle ground. Adding to her troubles, his horse had died from the infected wound, despite her best attempts to save it. The other livestock grew skittish, perhaps sensing the foreign presence. She was nearly out of feed. Supplies were dwindling. She knew she'd have to travel to the nearest settlement or her neighbors soon. But leaving Naichi alone in her house felt foolish. She would find him gone, or worse, he might ransack her home or set it ablaze in vengeance. Yet something in his eyes told her he wouldn't do that. During his feverish delirium, he muttered names possibly of family, including one repeated phrase, "I will avenge them." Those words chilled her. He had lost people he loved, just as she had. On the fifth night of his stay, Naichi managed to sit up. His voice was hoarse, but determined. "Why?" he asked in halting English. "Why help me?" Maria paused, fingers tightening around a bowl of stew she'd made for him. The question had haunted her since the moment she dragged him into the cabin. Why risk everything for a man who could be her enemy? Finally, she answered the only truth she knew: I couldn't just let you die. He studied her for a long moment, eyes reflecting both curiosity and disbelief. In that silence, something fragile bloomed, an understanding perhaps, or at least a temporary truce born of circumstance. But in the Wild West, fragile things rarely survive untested. Outside, the days crawled by in blistering heat. Maria continued to tend to Naichi's injuries while balancing her other chores. She soon realized that she had to replenish food and basic supplies. Her small patch of corn was parched from the relentless sun, and with an extra mouth to feed, her pantry grew sparse. Tucked away in a corner were the last provisions she had purchased in Tucson: flour, a bit of coffee, dried beans, and bacon. Living alone, she had stretched these essentials with the skill of a frontier woman, but now they dwindled faster than she anticipated. She was keenly aware of how precarious her position was. A single misstep could lead to starvation or worse, exposure of her secret. On a sweltering afternoon, Maria resolved to pay a visit to the bishops, who lived about 3 miles away. She saddled her sturdy mare, Lucy, who pawed anxiously at the ground, as though sensing Maria's unease. Before she left, she turned to Naichi, who was propped up against a pillow, face still gaunt, but more alert. "Rest," she told him. "I need supplies. I'll come back soon." His dark eyes flicked toward her rifle, then to the locked trunk in the corner where she kept a spare pistol. Perhaps he suspected she might turn him in, but he only nodded and whispered, "Stay safe." The ride to the bishop's farm was uneventful, the desert eerily quiet beneath the late afternoon sun. The bishop's small homestead appeared ahead, a barn, a corral, and a ramshackle house made of sun-baked adobe. Mrs. Bishop, Emma, greeted Maria at the door, her face drawn with concern. "Thank heavens," Emma said. "We've been worried. Raids have picked up near the old stagecoach trail. Rumor is a group of Apaches has been spotted." Maria forced a calm smile. "I'm all right. Just need some flour and maybe a bit of sugar, if you can spare it." Emma disappeared into her pantry, while Mr. Bishop, a lanky man with a sun-worn face, sidled up to Maria, saw a cavalry patrol riding toward the hills. "Word is, they're searching for that Apache raider Naichi. They say he's a tricky one, slipped through their fingers twice now." Fear sparked behind Maria's eyes, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. "I hadn't heard," she lied. "Is he really that dangerous?" "That's the talk," Mr. Bishop replied. "He's rumored to have led attacks on a ranch near the foothills, killed the owner from what I hear." Maria's heart pounded. Was that the truth, or frontier gossip twisted over time? She recalled Naichi's scars, his thirst for vengeance. Unease settled over her, but she quickly busied herself tying the sack of flour to Lucy's saddle. She made her excuses, something about trying to outrun the fading daylight, and thanked them for their generosity. On her way back, the last hues of sunset clung to the horizon. The temperature began to drop, and the desert's nocturnal symphony commenced. Yips of coyotes, the rustle of wind through mesquite. Maria's mind churned with conflicting thoughts. The cavalry was hunting Naichi, and he might indeed be involved in bloodshed. She knew next to nothing of his past, only that he was injured, and she had chosen to help him. Could she have saved a murderer? Her conscience wrestled with her sense of compassion. She pictured how he looked in her bed, battered and frail, holding his side in pain. If he were truly a monster, would he accept her help? Then again, perhaps he was too weak to retaliate. The desert was full of secrets. Lost in these thoughts, she almost didn't hear the distant thunder of hoofbeats until they were upon her. Two men on horseback emerged from behind a rocky bluff, blocking her path. Maria's pulse raced as she reached for her rifle. The men wore ragged clothes, not cavalry uniforms, their eyes gleaming with ill intent. Bandits, she had heard of road agents and thieves who prowled the territory, preying on isolated travelers. "Well, look what we got here," sneered the taller man, a greasy brim of a hat shading his eyes. He spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "A lady out all by her lonesome this late." Maria held her ground, her rifle cocked. "I'm just heading home. Leave me be." The second man, younger and lean, circled around on his horse, trying to flank her. She could smell the stench of whiskey on his breath, even from several yards away. "Now don't be unfriendly, ma'am," he drawled. "We're just fixing to lighten your load is all." Sparks of fear and anger lit Maria's chest. She refused to show weakness. "If you think I can't shoot straight, you're mistaken," she said, voice trembling but resolute. Then, in a gamble, she bluffed. "My husband's right, behind me. You're 2 breaths away from a bullet." A tense moment followed. The men exchanged glances. Finally, the older one smirked. "We got ourselves a feisty one. Ain't worth the trouble. Let's go." With one last glare, they spurred their horses and galloped into the desert night, perhaps deciding that an armed confrontation was not to their advantage. Maria exhaled shakily. She spurred Lucy forward, praying those men didn't have accomplices lurking ahead. But no further trouble arose. By the time she returned to her homestead, the moon hung high, drenching the desert in silver light. She rushed inside with her supplies, half expecting to find Naichi gone. He wasn't. He lay there pale but awake, watching her with a mixture of suspicion and something else she couldn't decipher. Relief flooded her. At least for now, they were both safe. But with the cavalry hunting for Naichi and bandits roving the territory, how long could that safety last? The following week, Naichi gradually regained strength. He could stand with effort, and Maria supported him, guiding him around the cramped interior of the cabin for short walks. She tried not to let her guard down too much. Though his condition improved, the situation remained perilous. Each moment Naichi stayed was one more moment that might condemn her as a traitor in the eyes of the territorial authorities or mark her as a target for Apache retaliation if she handled matters poorly. One night, as rain pattered on the roof, a rare desert shower, Naichi insisted on stepping outside. Maria helped him through the door, and they stood under the eaves, watching lightning illuminate the distant mountains. He leaned on a makeshift crutch carved from a sturdy branch. When thunder rumbled, he closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, as though drawing strength from the storm. "You could leave," Maria ventured. "It's risky to stay." He glanced at her, the flash of lightning reflecting in his gaze. "Where would I go?" he asked in a voice that still betrayed weariness. "My band? Scattered. Soldiers hunt us. My family?" His voice wavered. "Gone." Maria stared at the rain-soaked night, thinking of all the families torn apart by war, disease, and the unyielding frontier. She could relate to the loneliness etched in his voice. Though their worlds were vastly different, they shared the anguish of loss. He turned to her curiosity, flickering behind his exhaustion. "You alone, why?" She swallowed. It was the question no one dared ask aloud, but which every neighbor and passerby understood. "My husband died," she said softly, arms crossed against the chill creeping into her bones. Fever took him. Naichi nodded, his expression thoughtful. They spoke no more that evening, each enveloped in private sorrow. Yet the quiet exchange spoke volumes. They were both ghosts, adrift in the desert, clinging to a place that no longer felt like home. 2 days later, Naichi managed to limp around the yard without support. Maria busied herself chopping firewood, her gaze darting occasionally toward him. He tested his balance near the corral fence, trying to rebuild his strength. Without warning, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. A single rider approached, carrying an air of urgency. Maria dropped the axe and waved Naichi inside. He complied, though, with a visible flash of annoyance. She recognized the rider as Caleb Monroe, a local who sometimes passed through to trade goods. He drew his horse up at the fence, face grim. "Mrs. Colton," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "I came to warn you. The cavalry's combing these parts, searching for an Apache. They claim he's that raider Naichi. Also heard a rumor some vigilantes are on the prowl, itching for trouble." Blood drained from Maria's face. "Are they close by?" Caleb nodded, eyes flicking to the cabin. "They're not far. Already questioned me and some others. They'll likely stop here soon." Her mind whirled. "Thank you for telling me." He hesitated, gaze sweeping the small property. "You've always been good folks," he said. "Just watch yourself. Some men out there don't need much excuse to cause harm." With that, he urged his horse onward, galloping toward the bishop's place. Maria exhaled shakily, then hurried into the cabin. Naichi stood near a window, jaw clenched. He had overheard enough. "They will come," he said bluntly. She nodded. "Yes, we need a plan." Silence stretched between them. For days now, an unspoken tension had loomed. If the cavalry found him, they'd likely hang him, or worse. If Maria was discovered harboring him, she could face dire consequences. The law in these parts was harsh, and often turned a blind eye to nuance. Compassion toward an Apache might be seen as treason. "We could try to hide you," Maria suggested. "In the cellar, maybe." But even as she said it, she realized how easily a determined search party could sniff him out. Naichi's expression hardened in resolve. "I go," he said. "Leave you safe." She shook her head vehemently. "You can't travel far in your condition. Not with the cavalry scouring the desert. You'll be caught." Outside, the wind picked up, slamming a loose shutter against the cabin wall. Their predicament felt like a cruel trick of fate, two lost souls cornered by a world that saw them as enemies. Maria swallowed, steeling herself against the panic rising in her chest. "We'll figure out a way," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Somehow. A crack of hooves against dry earth jolted them from their discussion early the next morning. Peering through a gap in the shutters, Maria spotted a cavalry detail of 3 men approaching. Their uniforms, dusty from riding, bore the markings of the U.S. Army. The lead man, Sergeant Mills, was someone Maria had seen in Tucson, known for his unwavering disdain of Apaches. Heart-hammering, Maria motioned for Naichi to hide. They scrambled to the small space beneath the floorboards, originally dug out for food storage in hot weather. With no time to spare, she tossed him a blanket. "Stay quiet," she urged, covering the hatch with a worn rug. She had barely returned to the main room when the soldiers banged on the door. Forcing calm, she opened it, stepping outside. "Good morning, gentlemen." Sergeant Mills tipped his hat curtly. "Ma'am, we're searching for the Apache known as Naichi, rumored to be in these parts." Maria feigned ignorance. "I've heard tales but haven't seen a soul. I'm alone here." The other 2 soldiers dismounted, their eyes scanning the property. One began to circle the cabin. Anxiety twisted in Maria's gut. She tried to engage Sergeant Mills in conversation, hoping to distract him. "Has there been trouble nearby?" Mills' eyes narrowed. "Yes, rancher James Pollard was found dead near the foothills. Some suspect Naichi's group. We have orders to search every homestead." A flicker of dread shot through Maria. Was Nietzsche responsible for Pollard's death? She had no proof either way, but the possibility unsettled her. Yet the memory of his vulnerability, the raw grief in his eyes, flared within her. She clung to her faith in the man who had quietly thanked her for saving his life. Sergeant Mills pushed past her, entering the cabin. "We'll take a look around if you don't mind." She couldn't refuse without arousing suspicion. Her heart pounded as Mills inspected every corner, pulling back curtains, opening the trunk, even peering under the bed. Thankfully, he did not notice the rug's slight bulge covering the hidden hatch. After several tense minutes, he turned up empty-handed. "We'll be on our way," he said, striding outside. "If you see anything, report it." Maria nodded, forcing a tight smile. "Of course." He paused on the threshold, fixing her with a hard stare. "These Apaches killed your husband, if you recall. Fever might have taken him eventually, but they'd have done worse if they had the chance." The sting of his remark made her tense, but she gave no reply. She watched as the cavalry rode off into the distance. When the dust finally settled, she returned inside, collapsing against a chair with trembling limbs. After a moment, she moved the rug, lifted the hatch, and gestured for Nietzsche to come out. He emerged, face set in a grim line. "They will return," he said simply. Maria nodded, swallowing back the terror. She busied herself making tea, if only to have something to occupy her shaking hands. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the boiling water on the stove. Then Nietzsche spoke in a low voice. "If they find me here, it means your death too." Maria set the tin cup on the table, the clank echoing between them. "I know," she whispered, "unless we have a reason." His gaze locked on hers. "Marriage." Her heart jolted. She stared at him dumbfounded. "What are you talking about?" In the territory, he said, fighting for the right words in English, the law. "If man is in a settler's home as husband, not forced from the land right away, they must wait for some hearing. This might give time or safety." Maria shook her head, incredulous. "You're suggesting we—" He leaned forward, eyes fierce but pleading. "Yes, forced if you want. But maybe it's only way to protect you and me." He paused, clearly hating the desperation in his own suggestion. White law can't easily hang an Apache man in his wife's home without cause. They need trial. Or maybe give me chance to get away. She felt her stomach twist. The idea seemed absurd, blasphemous even. A white settler widow marrying an Apache raider to dodge the cavalry's wrath. Yet logic wormed its way into her thoughts. The law of the territory was complicated, but wives often had property rights. If he was legally bound to her, if word got out that she had chosen him for better or worse, any vigilante action could be seen as interfering in a lawful marriage. At least, that was the theory. It might buy them time, confuse the cavalry, or at least complicate their immediate impulse to kill on sight. Still, it was madness. "I can't just marry you," she protested, her voice shaky. "I don't even know you." Nietzsche's expression flickered with pain. "And I do not know you," he said quietly. "But we survive together or die alone." Emotions surged in Maria's chest. Confusion, fear, guilt, and a strange undercurrent of compassion for this man who was as trapped by circumstance as she was. The memory of Sergeant Mills' hate-filled gaze lingered in her mind. She knew the next time they returned, they might not be so courteous. And if the rumor that Nietzsche killed Pollard spread further, the noose would only tighten. She inhaled deeply, tears pricking her eyes. "We can't do it like this," she murmured. Nietzsche nodded, acknowledging her turmoil, but resolute. Think. Decide soon. Time is short. A heavy silence fell, both aware that the next move might seal their fates. Outside, a vulture circled lazily in the sky, a dark omen against the burning sun. That night, sleep evaded Maria entirely. She lay in bed, haunted by her past vows to Thomas. She recalled their wedding day in Santa Fe, modest, heartfelt, with plans for a bright future. Now here she was, in a remote cabin, faced with a proposition that defied everything she once believed. But the frontier was a place where conventional ethics often collided with brutal necessity. In the pre-dawn darkness, she lit a lantern and found Naichi sitting on a stool by the window, watching the night dissolve into soft grey light. The tension between them was palpable. He didn't look at her, but spoke in a near whisper. "I will leave today." She stiffened. "Why?" He turned, eyes full of resignation. "I see your torment. This is not your fight." Maria swallowed. "But if they catch you," he shrugged, face stoic, "then I die fighting." Something in Maria cracked at those words, a memory of Thomas's last moments. She couldn't let another soul slip away, not when there was a chance, no matter how desperate to save him. She clenched her fists. "Wait." Naichi studied her, his expression guarded. Maria forced out the words before fear overcame her. "We'll do it." He didn't move for a long second, as if he doubted his own hearing. "Are you sure?" She exhaled a trembling breath, nodding slowly. "We'll find a way to make it look official. Then maybe we can keep you safe, at least until you heal enough to find your people. After that, we'll figure something out." Silence spread between them. A fleeting look of relief and gratitude flickered across Naichi's features before it was buried behind a mask of grim determination. "Thank you." They set to work on a plan. The nearest outpost with a justice of the peace was in Tombstone, a day's ride, but heading there together would be tantamount to painting targets on their backs. Instead, they agreed Maria would try to secure some form of documentation in private. She had a limited understanding of legal procedures. Thomas had handled most of that, but she hoped to glean advice from someone discreet. They didn't have to wait long before fate intervened in a twisted manner. At midday, a traveling preacher named Reverend Albright arrived on horseback, presumably making his rounds through the remote settlements. He was an acquaintance of Thomas's, known for quick wedding ceremonies. Maria bit her lip, steeling herself. This might be the best chance to legitimize the arrangement. Reverend Albright stepped inside, tipping his bowler hat. "Sister Maria, I heard about your husband's passing. My condolences." He paused upon spotting Naichi, who stood stiffly in the shadows. Concern flickered in the preacher's face. "Are you all right, my dear?" Maria's heart pounded. She introduced Naichi as a friend in need, carefully omitting his heritage for the moment. "Reverend," she began shakily, we need you to unite us in marriage." Albright blinked, clearly taken aback. His gaze darted from Maria to Naichi and back. He cleared his throat. "Are you sure, child? This is quite sudden." She forced a nod, ignoring the cold sweat trickling down her neck. "Yes, I'm sure." Unease etched itself across the Reverend's features, but frontier life was full of abrupt unions, especially in times of desperation. Albright sighed. "Very well. Let's proceed." Maria and Naichi stood before him, the preacher's small Bible in hand. In halting English, Naichi repeated the vows as best he could. Maria's throat constricted around each word. She half expected the sky to open and strike her for daring to replace the vows she once made with Thomas. But no thunder rolled overhead. Only the blazing sun bore witness. Within minutes, it was done. The Reverend signed a hasty certificate on a scrap of parchment declaring them man and wife. Maria clutched the paper in trembling hands, hardly believing this surreal turn of events. Reverend Albright regarded them gravely, still wrestling with confusion. "May the Lord guide you both," he offered awkwardly. Maria pressed a coin into his hand, the last of her savings, as he stepped onto his horse. He rode away, casting backward glances, until he disappeared in a swirl of dust. Alone again in the cabin, Maria and Nietzsche stood in a heavy silence. No celebratory kiss, no warm embraces. Only the knowledge that they had bound their destinies together with flimsy legal thread. Nietzsche, reading the turmoil on her face, spoke softly. "I do not want to burden you." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "You're not a burden," she managed, though the tears trembling in her eyes hinted at the chaos inside. "We do what we must to survive." Yet as evening fell, Maria stared at the piece of parchment, feeling the weight of two marriages on her heart, one cherished and lost, the other forced upon her by circumstance. Nietzsche paced nearby, expression unreadable. Neither spoke of what the future might hold. At that moment, survival was the only concern. Love, trust, and any sense of normalcy seemed like luxuries in a land that devoured both the hopeful and the hopeless alike. The next day, Maria set out with Nietzsche's makeshift marriage certificate in her saddlebag. Her mission to circulate word, subtly, that she had remarried so neighbors or passing lawmen would not be caught unawares if they spotted an Apache on her property. The rumor alone might serve as a makeshift shield, giving them time before any vigilantes decided to take matters into their own hands. She visited Emma Bishop, who greeted her with surprise. Married Emma echoed, brows shooting up in disbelief. So soon after, Thomas Maria feigned a half-smile. Frontier life's too hard to live alone, and he needed a place. Hurt flickered in Emma's eyes. "We would have helped you, dear. You didn't have to rush." She paused, searching Maria's face. Is he a good man?" Maria's chest tightened. She could not easily lie to her friend. "He's had a hard life," she said carefully. "But he's strong. I believe we can make it work." Emma, sensing the discomfort in Maria's tone, let the subject drop. She promised to spread the news discreetly, to spare Maria gossip. Grateful, Maria headed to the small mercantile next, which also served as a makeshift post office. She restocked on flour, salt, and a fresh spool of thread. Quietly, she mentioned her new husband, hoping the storekeeper, Mr. Tandy, would pass along the word. Still, she felt the weight of suspicion in every gaze. The territory was no stranger to quick marriages, but the swirl of unrest over Apache raids made her new union all the more peculiar. Fear gnawed at her. What if someone recognized Nietzsche's name or face? Upon her return, Nietzsche was outside chopping wood, an activity he insisted on despite his partially healed wound. The rhythmic swing of the axe paused as she dismounted. She noticed his stamina had improved. He stood straighter, his face less ashen than before. They lugged supplies into the cabin together, an uneasy domestic rhythm forming. After stowing the flour and salt, they rested at the table. Nietzsche broke the silence. "You do not ask what I did." "About Pollard." Maria stiffened. Memories of the cavalry's warnings rushed back. "Did you kill him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her gaze without flinching. "No. My band was near that ranch to find water. Pollard shot one of my brothers. We fired back. Pollard was killed, but not by me." She absorbed this, her pulse pounding. She believed him. though she recognized how easily such stories could be twisted. "They'll blame you anyway." Naichi nodded, bitterness etched in his features. Always the same. A hush fell, each of them weighed down by the brutal complexities of the frontier. Maria finally spoke, voice wavering. "How can this end?" He shrugged. "I will stay until strong enough, then find my people, maybe join them, or leave territory." The thought of him leaving evoked a surprising ache in her chest. The forced marriage had forged an unlikely bond. She no longer looked at him with the same mixture of fear and suspicion. She saw the man who had survived unimaginable losses just as she had, and risked trusting her enough to stand at her side, if only temporarily. Later that evening, they took supper together, beans and hard bread, a meager meal, but shared in companionable silence. Afterward, Naichi retreated outside to tend a small fire under the star-laden sky. Maria hesitated at the threshold, torn by conflicting emotions. She joined him, finally sitting on a fallen log a short distance away. The desert wind caressed them, carrying whispers of coyote cries and rustling sage. She watched the firelight dance across his face, highlighting the weariness and lingering pain. Her mind flashed back to the day she found him wounded and near death. Now they were bound by an unorthodox union designed for their mutual protection. She wasn't sure what she felt: gratitude, confusion, or even the faint stirrings of empathy that might border on affection. Naichi turned to her, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "Thank you." Again, she managed a small, sad smile. "You saved me too, you know," she said softly. "In a way." They sat like that for a long time, two souls sharing the warmth of a single fire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for one night, they allowed themselves a semblance of peace. The uneasy peace did not last. A fortnight later, the thunder of horses shattered the dawn's stillness. Maria and Naichi awoke instantly, scrambling outside to find a group of riders galloping toward the homestead. At their head rode none other than Sergeant Mills, face hard as granite. Flanking him were men in civilian clothes, brandishing rifles, vigilantes. The dreaded confrontation had come. Maria's heart seized. She and Naichi exchanged urgent glances. Naichi's eyes blazed with determination. He no longer appeared weak or helpless. He motioned for her to stay behind him, but she shook her head, stepping forward to meet the intruders. Sergeant Mills reined in his horse with a snort. "Morning, Mrs. Colton," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "Word is, you've taken a new husband." His gaze flicked to Naichi with disgust. "An Apache." Maria held her ground spine straight. "That's correct." One of the vigilantes, a bearded man with a faded hat, spat on the ground. "We won't stand for Apaches living among us. Rumor says he's Naichi, the one who's been terrorizing ranchers." Naichi clenched his fists, but Maria placed a trembling hand on his arm. She produced the marriage certificate, stepping closer to Sergeant Mills. "You see this? We're married in the eyes of the law. If you harm him, you'll be breaking that law. You have no right." Mills snatched the paper, eyes flicking over it. A sneer curled his lips. "A flimsy piece of paper won't protect a murderer." Maria's breath caught. "He's done nothing wrong here. If you have evidence, then take it to the proper authorities. But this is my land, and he is my husband." The vigilantes muttered angrily, rifles still trained on Naichi. Tension crackled like lightning through the yard. For a moment, Maria feared they would open fire and claim self-defense. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then Mills gestured to two of his men. "Search the cabin. If we find any stolen property or evidence of raids, we'll string him up right here." They dismounted, pushing past Maria, ignoring her protests. Naichi stood rigid, every muscle coiled. Maria's mind raced. If they found anything, even the arrow that had injured Naichi, would they twist it into proof of his guilt? Minutes passed each one, drenched in dread. Finally, the men emerged looking disappointed. Nothing, one grumbled. Just a few old supplies. Sergeant Mills glowered, uncertainty flickering across his face. Vigilante justice was common, but openly defying a legal marriage could still bring repercussions from higher-ups. The territory might be lawless in many ways, but military officials disliked unauthorized lynchings that could spark public outcry. Maria seized the moment, stepping forward again. "We have done nothing illegal. I ask that you leave my property immediately." Her voice trembled but held a fierce edge. The bearded vigilante's face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," he spat, harboring a savage. He shifted in his saddle. "Don't expect sympathy when he turns on you." Naichi took a deliberate step forward, fists balled, but Maria caught his arm, silently begging him not to provoke them. Mills shot Naichi a lethal glare. "We'll be back for you," he growled, throwing the marriage certificate in the dirt. Turning his horse, he spurred it into a gallop, and the rest of the men followed, kicking up a cloud of dust. Only when the riders vanished did Maria realize how hard she was shaking. Naichi's hand, Daus, came to rest gently on her shoulder, an unexpected gesture of comfort. She swallowed, picking up the paper they had tossed aside. It was crumpled, dirt-smudged, yet still their tenuous shield. She looked at Naichi, whose gaze was filled with fury and a hint of concern for her. "They'll come back," she whispered, "and next time they might not show restraint." Naichi nodded, jaw tight. "We fight or we run." Running seemed impossible. Vigilantes would likely track them. Fighting would pit them against a well-armed group bent on bloodshed. Maria's mind whirled, searching for a third option. "Maybe we can appeal to someone with higher authority," she suggested, voice shaky. "There's a Colonel Reardon in Tucson. Thomas once mentioned he was more sympathetic to peaceful solutions. If we present our case, show proof of innocence, maybe they'll intervene." It was a desperate plan, but the only one that offered hope of a peaceful resolution. Otherwise, they were condemned to a life of hiding and fear. Naichi watched, her eyes grave. "If you believe it, I follow." She nodded, heart swelling, with equal parts fear and determination. "Let's ride to Tucson. Maybe we can gather the truth about what happened with Pollard. Find witnesses who'll confirm you didn't kill him. Then we'll go to Colonel Reardon." They both knew the journey would be perilous, a gamble in a land ruled by steel and lead. Yet as they locked eyes, an unspoken agreement passed between them. They were partners now, forced by circumstance, but growing in trust. Whatever the frontier threw at them next, they would face together. The journey to Tucson took 3 days under the unforgiving desert sun. Maria and Naichi rationed every crumb and drop of water, sleeping under stars, and taking turns keeping watch. Though they barely spoke, the hardship created an unspoken bond between them. As they neared Tucson, wary eyes followed them, especially Naichi. An Apache in town was always cause for suspicion. Maria clutched his arm, trying to project the image of a married couple, hoping it might shield them from violence. They made their way to the military post, where Maria requested an audience with Colonel Reardon. After some protest from a gate soldier, she brandished their marriage certificate. Word spread fast, a settler widow demanding justice for her Apache husband. Colonel Reardon received them in a modest office. Tall, stern, and precise, he listened as Maria recounted their story, how she found Naichi wounded, how vigilantes were hunting him, and why they married out of desperation. Naichi added his account of the confrontation at Pollard's ranch. They were seeking water. Pollard fired first, and one of Naichi's kinsmen was killed. In return, Pollard died, but not by Naichi's hand. The colonel studied them both. "Why should I believe this?" he asked. "Because I'd have nothing to gain from lying," Maria said. "If Naichi meant me harm, he had plenty of chances." Reardon sat back, rubbing his chin. "There's tension across this territory. Some want blood, not trials. But I won't allow a lynching under my command." He revealed he had already tracked down a witness, a ranch hand named Vicente Gomez, who claimed Pollard had indeed fired first. It was the break they needed. "I'll arrange a hearing," Reardon said. "A judge will weigh the facts. If Naichi is found innocent, I'll offer you protection temporarily. But until then, you'll stay in guarded quarters at the old mission. It's the safest place I can offer." Relief washed over Maria. It wasn't a pardon, but it was a chance. They were escorted to the mission, a quiet adobe structure on the outskirts of town. There, under constant watch, they waited. The mission was sparse, stone floors, narrow beds, but safer than facing vigilantes in the open. At night, Maria stared at the cracked ceiling, heart heavy with fear. Naichi remained calm, sharpening his knife slowly, methodically. Neither said much, but they understood each other now better than words aloud. On the third night, Maria asked quietly, "If the trial goes badly, what will you do?" Naichi didn't look at her. "I won't run, but I won't die begging either." His voice was quiet but resolute. She reached out, resting her hand on his. "You won't be alone." They both knew the trial wouldn't just determine Naichi's fate. It would test the frontier's fragile concept of justice and whether love, even one born of desperation, could stand against fear, hate, and lawless vengeance. The date was set, and as dawn crept over the desert, Maria and Naichi braced themselves for the truth to finally come to light. News of the trial spread through Tucson like wildfire. Some were furious, and Apache was even being given a hearing, while others hoped it might finally cool the bloody tensions brewing in the territory. Maria and Naichi remained under guard at the old mission, their lives in limbo. Colonel Reardon did what he could. He had located Vicente Gomez, a ranch hand, who'd witnessed the shootout at Pollard's ranch. Gomez claimed Pollard had fired first. The hearing was held in the chapel beside the mission benches, crammed with wary local soldiers and a few grim-faced vigilantes. Sergeant Mills was there too, eyes filled with contempt. Maria sat beside Naichi, pulse thudding in her ears. Judge Bartholomew Wharton, an older man with a gavel and little tolerance for nonsense, presided. Colonel Reardon opened by outlining the case, highlighting the lack of clear evidence and noting Vicente Gomez's testimony. When called, Gomez nervously confirmed that Pollard had fired the first shot. "They just wanted water," he mumbled. Pollard panicked. He hit one of them, then it all went bad. Under questioning, Gomez admitted he couldn't confirm whether Naichi had fired at all. The crowd stirred, some skeptical, others quiet. Sergeant Mills stood next, insisting Naichi was a known raider. Even if he didn't pull the trigger, Mills said, glaring at Naichi, he was there. "He's a killer." Maria took the stand next. She told of how she found Naichi injured, how she treated his wounds, how they'd married for survival. Her voice shook, but her resolve didn't. "I don't know everything about his past," she said, "but I know he didn't kill Pollard." Finally, Naichi addressed the court. His English was slow but steady. "We needed water. Pollard shot first. My friend died. We defended ourselves. I did not kill him." His eyes were unwavering. The judge retired briefly to consider the evidence. Maria held Nietzsche's hand, bracing for the worst. When Wharton returned, silence blanketed the room. "There is insufficient evidence to convict," he announced. "Pollard fired the first shot. There's no proof this man fired the fatal one." Gasps echoed from the benches. However, Wharton continued, "These are volatile times. I strongly urge Nietzsche and his people to seek peace." Sergeant Mills slammed his fist on the bench. "This is a disgrace," he growled as he stormed out. Colonel Reardon approached, voice low. "You're free for now, but you should leave Tucson before those vigilantes decide to take justice into their own hands." Maria nodded. Her eyes burned with tears, but she held them back. They packed what little they had and prepared to ride. Outside, under the burning Arizona sun, Maria turned to Nietzsche. "Where do we go now?" He looked north. "I find my people. We hide, or build something new." A heavy silence followed. Then Maria reached for his hand. "We stay together." He nodded once. No promises, no fanfare, just survival and the first glimmer of something stronger than fear-hope. They rode into the horizon, leaving behind a city still buzzing with judgment and controversy. But ahead of them lay freedom, danger, and the possibility of a life neither of them had dared imagine. And so ends the tale of a settler widow and the Apache raider she saved, bound by necessity, tested by the unforgiving Wild West, and redeemed by a truth that refused to die. Their forced marriage may have begun in fear, but it led them to an improbable alliance, and perhaps even love. Now, as they vanish into the silent plains, the echoes of thunder and hooves remind us that new beginnings can arise from the darkest circumstances. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, yearning to know whether two strangers could really find peace in a hostile land, then keep that spirit alive. Like this video if it stirred your imagination. Share it to let others experience the twists and turns of the frontier, and subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next pulse-pounding tale. Your support fuels more stories that keep legends alive. Safe travels, amigos.